Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to see you here. And today I want to talk about how to do a keto or low carb lifestyle. There are other videos where I talk about how to reverse diabetes and how we can lose weight effectively and how we can avoid getting cancer. And the low carb diet is always the solution for so many health problems. So today I want to tell you exactly what to do, and I hope I give you enough information so that you can get started quite easily, equipped with all the knowledge you need to have a healthy lifestyle. Just a quick disclaimer, if you're diabetic and you are on medications, I highly recommend that you talk to your low carb doctor, low carb dietitian, or anyone who is in the sort of practical or medical field, healthcare profession, that they are trained in low carb diet, because if you're on medications, it could be dangerous if you do it on yourself. Other than that, pretty much everyone can do, or almost everyone can do a low carb diet. There's only a few conditions, genetic conditions, where you shouldn't do a low carb diet, but the vast majority of people can do it. And it's just the people that have medications, they should not do it by themselves, and they should find a clinician who is helping them to get off their medications or adjust their medications safely, so that the low carb diet is not going to be a life-threatening outcome, because it can, if you're on certain medications and you're on a low carb diet, that is not good. But again, for the vast majority of people, it should be just fine. And I'm hoping to give you enough information that you know what to do and how to get started. Stay tuned. Okay, let's get started. How to do a low carb, healthy fat, healthy lifestyle. Again, it's not individual medical advice. If you have any conditions, please see your low carb doctor. You can find other good resources you can go to on the dietdoctor.com pages. There's lots of more information as well. So you can, I'll link it all down below, and you can basically get started with as soon as you're ready. So first, I would like to have a chat about what is actually a low carb diet. And there are several definitions. So and it heavily depends on how many carbohydrates someone is taking. So if you're having a ketogenic diet, that means you're usually under 20 grams of carbohydrates per day. So anything under 20 grams, that's usually ketogenic, which means you're in nutritional ketosis. You are in the full fat burning mode. If you're having between 20 and 50 grams of carbohydrates per day, you're kind of a moderate low carb diet, and everything between 50 and 100 grams is more a liberal low carbohydrate diet. So anything above 100 grams is not really a low carb diet. So, and it really depends on everyone's flexibility, metabolic flexibility, if you can have more or if you should have less carbohydrates. So how does it basically look? How does the low carb diet compare to the normal standard diet? So in the low carb diet, we have very little carbohydrates of our caloric intake, and the majority from the energy comes from fat. And the proteins is about a third of your intake should be proteins. At the moment, on the Australian standard diet, we are supposed to have a little bit more, about 50 to 60% carbohydrates, where we get our energy from. And from fat, it shouldn't be more than 10 to 20%. And the proteins are pretty much the same. So if you compare the two, so the standard Australian diet with a low carb diet, the proteins are pretty much the same. The biggest change is the amount of fat and the amount of carbohydrates. So there are a few other words for low carbohydrate diet. So some people call it the Atkins diet. Some people call it the keto diet. And again, if it's below 20 grams per day of carbohydrates, and you're well and truly in a ketogenic diet. Some people call it banting. So there's a lot of words for it, and they all have got slight differences. But overall, the main focus on all of those is to reduce the intake of carbohydrates. So I have another video about how the reduction of carbohydrates can benefit a lot with weight loss. So there's more details into that video. In my clinic, I do it very individually. So some people have too many conditions where it's very, very beneficial that you go really below 20 grams. Other people are metabolically relatively healthy and all they want is just losing weight, and we can be a little bit more liberal, and we can add a little bit more carbs. And everyone is different, and it really depends on their metabolic flexibility, how much they can tolerate, and how well it fits to their lifestyle. So personally, I never tell anyone what to do. I give my patients information and they can do what they want with the information, and I'm just guiding them through their journey. That's how I operate. So, and it's really highly dependent on what's your lifestyle like, what's your motivation like, and what's your metabolic health. So because many people are asking me, how does low carb compare to paleo? And they're actually quite similar. So I only introduced this here because I get that question a lot. So low carb and paleo have a lot of things in common. So for example, you can have all the fresh vegetables, you can have meat and eggs, and you can have fat and nuts and everything, everything that grows out there is pretty much allowed in both diets. The main difference, what low carb is, so we focus, we can only have certain amounts of foods that do not have too much carbohydrate. So when it comes to fruits, we really focus on the low carb fruits, which is the apricots and nectarines and watermelons. And we can have, with the low carb diet, we can have all the dairy products as well, preferably high fat, like as in cheese and yogurt and milk and butter. So, and paleo is pretty much, it's a diet which we had before we invented agriculture. So in the paleo, you can basically have all the natural sweetness. So you can knock yourself out with sweet fruits and with honey. Having said that, in the early days when we had, before we had agriculture, yes, honey was available, but it was usually a bit of a discussion with the bees, and you can ask if the bees are kindly sharing your honey. So I think it's probably not the safest thing to do if you're out in the wild. So it's nothing compared to what it is today. Today we get it all nicely prepared in a jar, and then we have the honey. So which could lead basically to a consumption of so much more sugar. But as per paleo, that is not agriculture, it is allowed. And the same is for fruits. So in paleo, you can have all sorts of fruits, even the fruits that are fairly high in sugars, like the bananas and pineapples and mangoes and cherries. So they're very, very high. And if someone is metabolically unhealthy, I would not recommend that because they have so much more sugar contained in those fruits. And if you think about it, back in the old days, more than 10,000 years ago, the bananas have not been as sweet and the mangoes have not been as big and sweet. So the fruits which we eat today is nowhere near what it was in the old days. I've got an entire video how everything has changed and how this applies to our modern day. Because yes, you say, okay, paleo is the natural form, but it is not the natural form of eating which we had 10,000 years ago, because those fruits back then have been nowhere near as big and nowhere near as sweet as they are today. So they all have been selectively bred over the years so that we have the most sweetness and the most flesh out of it. So in paleo, you can also have all the so-called healthy, starchy vegetables, everything that lives in the ground. And corn is a very starchy, very sort of sugar-rich vegetable as well. But that's the main difference. So paleo basically means everything we have eaten before we had agriculture, so which also excludes dairy products. So in paleo, they don't have any sort of dairy product as in cheese and milk and yogurt. So I think paleo in itself is great. It's very, very great for autoimmune diseases. And it's great for if you really want to avoid all the environmental toxins, provided that you eat paleo in a safe and healthy way, which is sort of organic, and your fruits and vegetables are not sort of sprayed over with lots of herbicides and pesticides. Okay, I'll probably start with the bad news and answer the question, what should I not consume? And the basics are the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are nothing else but molecules that contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So we have the basic ones like, which is glucose, fructose, and galactose. So they're the basic sort of building blocks of all the carbohydrates. And then you can sort of randomly put them together. If you have a glucose and you have a fructose molecule together, that gives sucrose, and that's the most common form of sugar. So that's basically the sugar that is in everything. It's the white sugar we buy in boxes. And if you combine glucose and galactose, then you have lactose, which is the milk sugar. If you combine glucose and another glucose molecule, you have maltose. So everything that is sweet, that it's basically coming from those sort of little molecules of carbohydrates. So then we have the polysaccharides, and they are the ones that make it a little bit more tricky. So polysaccharide basically means it's just a long chain of glucose molecules, and that's what we call starch. And that where it becomes a little bit more tricky, because most people don't know how much sugar they're actually consuming with just normal starchy food. And if you don't believe me, I really encourage everyone to go onto the public health collaboration web pages. It's written down here. Everyone can see that. Dr. David Unwin has put lots of nice little sugar infographics together, showing how much sugar you actually consume with certain foods. So if you eat rice, who would have thought rice is full of sugar? If you consume a normal proportion of rice, you're consuming 10 teaspoons of sugar. And that's all in starches. So that's just basically long chains of sugar. The same happens for cereals and rice and muesli and oats, etc. So coming to the first thing, so the easiest. So it's all sugar. The sweet things, the sweet food is not, that's a no-brainer. So we know that baked goods and sweets and cakes and ice cream, that's all full of sugar. So that's the first thing I would always drop off. But then maybe a little bit less obvious is the fruit drinks. So they're full of fructose, and why fructose is not good for you. I have an entire other video about it. But ultimately I say, when some people say, oh, but you know, fructose is in fruits and am I not supposed to eat fruits? Yes, you can eat fruits. Eat your fruit. And here's the thing, eat your fruit, do not drink it. So there's lots of studies showing that it's really not good for you, and how fructose can really mess you up on a metabolic level, honestly. So I'll link everything below. All the studies are linked below. But that's something, if you just cut out those, plus including the soft drinks, because the soft drinks are quite high in carbs as well, high in sugar, that is probably not too bad. And of course, the junk food. That's the thing. So they're full of unhealthy fats. They are highly processed foods, and they have lots of additives in it. Having said that, I mean, my survival mode was McDonald's drive-through for a while when I was a new mom, and I had a little baby in the car, and the baby was sleeping, and I was hungry, and McDonald's drive-through saved a lot of my life. So having said that, so it is happening, but and I don't feel like a bad person, but they have their place maybe, but ultimately, if you want to have a healthy lifestyle, I think the regular McDonald's trip is probably not the best. So if you cross off all of those off your list, and you're otherwise metabolically healthy, that's probably as far as you can go, and you can have your carbs. But if you're metabolically unhealthy, have diabetes, have high blood pressure, struggling with your weight, then I think we should go a little step further. And the next step would be really cutting out the grain-based foods, which is the cereals, the breads, the flour, the rice, the oats. They are all highly, highly processed. And believe it or not, but flour is a highly processed food. Also, cut out all the light dairy products. Everything that says light or low fat on it, cut it out, because chances are it's full of sugar. The sweet yogurts, everything, all the dairy products that are sweet. And again, if you're a healthy, normal person, or not too metabolically, not too bad, you can probably stop here. But if you're just a little bit overweight, we need to move on. If you're overweight, have high blood pressure, and chances are quite high that you are metabolically unhealthy. So then the sweet fruits, so the grapes, the bananas, the oranges, the mangoes, the cherries, so they're all very, very high. They contain very high levels of sugar. And again, I say to my patients, okay, if the mango or the banana was your favorite food, you can have that back. So if someone is diabetic, overweight, I would probably say no for now. But once we have cleaned you up, once you have a good functioning or a good metabolic health, you can have that back on, as long as it's not every day. So that's all possible. So I never say you can never have that ever again. And even if you're unhealthy, and even if you're a full-blown diabetic, and you have got lots of other metabolic conditions, and you tell me, Anja, I'm not going to do it if I can't have my orange at least once a week, then I say, have your orange. I would rather you doing the diet to the best of your ability. And if the orange keeps you going, have that orange. It will things are getting a little bit slower, but I would rather see you improving slowly and steady as nothing, as if there's nothing at all happening. So the next things are the starchy vegetables, as in potatoes, and also sort of corn. Corn is full of sugar. That's really like big time. Carrots, to a certain degree, they're not too bad, but again, if you want to have results fast and good results, I would sort of drop them. And last but not least, the legumes. Legumes are they are relatively high in carbohydrates. They're probably not as high as potatoes, or nowhere near as high as potatoes, but they contain lots of lectins. And if you have any inflammatory conditions or any rheumatological conditions, I usually recommend staying away from legumes, because legumes are very highly inflammatory. Or if you have any bowel problems, any irritable bowel syndromes, or even Crohn's disease, I would stay away from legumes big time. So if you're a vegetarian, that's usually the go-to for proteins. And then it's always a matter of, okay, how can we modify the diet? But if you're happy eating meat and dairy products, and you don't really have an issue eating all the other food classes, then I would stay away from legumes. So far, I told you all the things you can't eat, and I hope you haven't lost hope, and I hope it doesn't sound too uncomfortable so far. It's basically, if you start getting worried about, oh my God, what happens with all the carbs? Don't worry. Our current food pyramid has no scientific evidence behind it. And also, if you think about it, there's no biochemical reaction in your body that requires glucose or carbohydrates, absolutely nothing. The only cells in our body that need glucose are our red blood cells. They don't have any mitochondria, so they need the energy from the glucose. But again, where do we get it from if we don't eat it? Our liver is more than happy to produce a certain amount of glucose out of the fat and out of the proteins we're eating. So technically, we do not need to consume any carbohydrates whatsoever. I'm not sure if you've heard of essential carbohydrates. Essential means you need it because your body can't do it themselves. So that's why we have essential proteins or essential amino acids. We need to eat them with our diet. Otherwise, we're getting very sick. So if we don't eat proteins, eventually we're going to die. If we don't eat fat, because there's certain fats we cannot make ourselves. So if we have a complete fat-free diet, we're going to die eventually. So if we don't eat any carbohydrates, nothing happens. You're not going to die. So just to give you some ease, carbohydrates are absolutely non-essential. We don't need it. That little bit of glucose we need for our red blood cells, and our brain sometimes is quite happy to burn a little bit of glucose as well, but we can make it. We can make it ourselves. So there's no need to actually eat carbohydrates. So what can we eat then? You can knock yourself out with meat. anything, bacon, lamb, chicken. I always recommend having primarily grass-fed animal products because they are very rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and they're so much healthier for you. And if you're a person that is very concerned about animal welfare, the grass-fed animal products are definitely the way to go. So if I have a steak from a cow that has been standing on green grass all its life, first, that meat is so much more delicious, it's so much more healthier, and that cow had a happy life. And personally, I don't really have many sort of ethical issues if I eat the meat from an animal that was happy, was not kept in a stable or inside somewhere and has been feeding grains. If you feed a cow only 100 days of grains, there's next to no omega-3 levels, omega-3 fatty acids left. So that's the start. So the meat from animals that have been grain-fed is nowhere near as healthy than the meat from grass-fed animals. And the same is true for eggs. So if you have pasture-raised eggs. You can also have, so processed meats are, as per the keto guidelines, it's okay because they have no carbohydrates in there. But you need to be careful because some of the processed meats actually do have some sugar in it, so additives. And I always say, okay, if you can avoid it, I would. But if you're a bit on the budget and you can't have the grass-fed products all the time, I would be just a little bit careful. Keto-wise, they're okay, and they're probably a good having around snack. So somewhere, if you're traveling a lot, having a little bit of a snack of a salami or something like that. But be aware, they have sometimes quite a fair bit of toxic chemicals in them, and some additives which can have an inflammatory response. So keto-wise, processed meats, okay. Health-wise, I would be careful, and I would discuss it on an individual base. Fish, so primarily fatty fish. So focus on cod, on herring, on mackerel, on salmon, sardines, or tuna, which is absolutely fine. From the health point of view, I would avoid any fish that comes from Norway or the Baltic Sea because they contain highly toxic components. And because the fish industry is the one that is least regulated. And where it's coming from, it's usually from the farmed fish where they have the fish food, and they contain quite a fair bit of toxic sort of elements. So if your budget allows, I would try to buy mostly fatty fish, wild caught. And there are a couple of products available. And I have a whole documentary about healthy food and how we can actually eat healthy. It's just a matter of finding it out. So not everything that is marked healthy is actually healthy, but that's another video. Seafood, crustaceans, mollusks, all very healthy. They're very, very nice and rich in minerals. So it's harder to get them farmed. So they're probably having less chemicals in there. But yeah, so as your protein source, that's all absolutely okay. And usually when I say meal planning, this is your step one, you pick your proteins. Vegetables. As per the vegetables, go for the green leafy vegetables. Have your kale, spinach, bok choy, asparagus, leek, cabbage, and have your brassicas as in broccoli and cauliflower. Cauliflower, by the way, is an excellent substitute for any sort of rice or sort of potato mashed dishes. So that's all you can have. That's all very, very low in carbohydrates, and they're packed food. So they have lots of minerals, lots of vitamins. Mushrooms, beautiful choice. You can even grow them yourself. It's lots of fun. Kids love it, doing that. As per the vegetables, capsicums, tomatoes, eggplants, avocados, zucchinis, all of that, absolutely wonderful. You can have some root vegetables as well. I usually say don't eat anything under the ground, but sweets are great. Beetroots are not too bad. Onions are relatively high in carbohydrates, but how much onions are you going to eat? The celeriac, the spring onions, and the radish, they're all relatively low in carbohydrates, or let's say moderately. So you don't really eat that much. And sweets are, that's the one here, they're an excellent substitute for potatoes. They don't have anywhere near the amount of carbohydrates that potatoes have. And of course, last but not least, the rhubarb. So that's great. So what about seeds and nuts? So again, you can have the real tree nuts. So pecan, macadamia nuts, hazelnuts, walnuts. So they're all excellent sort of choices. So the really low carb ones are the Brazil nuts and the pecan nuts and the macadamias. Moderately high is the pine nuts, the hazelnuts, and the almonds. And then there are a couple of nuts that are relatively high in carbs, which is the pistachios, the cashews, and the peanuts. So I would take them with a fair bit of caution, because if you really want to have a strict low carbohydrate diet, I would keep them out. And what about seeds? Seeds are absolutely excellent. So you can have all of them, like flax seeds and chia seeds and pumpkin seeds and hemp seeds and sunflower seeds and sesame seeds and all of them. So they're an excellent source of minerals and vitamins, and they have excellent sort of antioxidant sort of properties in the same way as nuts have. So they all leave a very, very small environmental footprint, and they're very gut friendly, and you can buy them in bulk, which makes it sort of a bit more cheaper, and they last fairly long before they go off. What about fruits? So the very low carb fruits are apricots and peaches and cantaloupes and watermelons, sorry. So they are really, really good. On top of it, you can have some berries, the currants, the blueberries, the strawberries, the raspberries, or the blackberries. So they are fairly good. And if you're diabetic and metabolically unhealthy, you should not have anything more than that. However, if you're otherwise metabolically healthy and you just want to lose weight, or you just want to live a healthy lifestyle, and you don't really have any goals other than your health, of course you can have the plums, you can have the orange, the kiwi. So they all have between 10 and 15 grams per 100 grams. So on this side, everything has less than 10 grams per 100 gram of fruit, and these guys have between 10 and 15. So it's just a touch higher. So again, if you're okay otherwise and you just want to lead a healthy lifestyle, you can have those. You can have your peas, you can have your mangoes, the kiwis, or your apple. And even if you are metabolically unhealthy and you would not stick to a low carb lifestyle without the apple, have your apple. So I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to make you feel guilty or anything like that. So if you really think like you cannot do it any other way, go for it, just in moderation. So again, the fruits we have today, they're nowhere near what they were 10,000 years ago. So that's why I always say, okay, take it with caution. And if that looks attractive to you, then that's fine. That's absolutely okay. So what about dairy and fat? So again, if you go for dairy, have everything full fat. Avoid everything that says low fat or light, because then chances are very, very high that they're loaded with sugar. Go for the Greek yogurt, go for the full fat cream, and go for the full fat cheeses. So that's absolutely fine. As per eggs, knock yourself out. You can have as many as possible. Again, have them pasture raised. So the chickens that have no access to grain, so all they eat all day long is a bit of grass and worms and bugs and all of that, their eggs are so much healthier than the eggs of chickens that have been fed grains. And don't be worried, don't be afraid of any sort of the cholesterol. You need cholesterol. Cholesterol is healthy. So eggs and the danger of elevated cholesterol levels have been disproven many, many times. You can have 5-6 eggs a day. That's perfectly fine. So don't be afraid of it. I have devoted an entire video on cholesterol and how important cholesterol is, and how many lies have been spread around about cholesterol over the years, and how the pharmaceutical industries have benefited a lot from lowering each and everyone's cholesterol, and how that's actually not really good. So, but it's an entire different video. For now, have your eggs. Be reassured, you're not going to do any damage if you have even 6 or 7 eggs a day. As per the fat, aim for animal fat. So have the butter, have the lard, have the ghee, have the duck fat. That's perfectly fine. They're not going to do anything. And again, there's a lot of studies backing up, you should have animal fats. We've been told, oh my God, it's also bad over the last 50 years, but it's not. Have those healthy fats. They are much more healthy. As per the plant-based fats, have olive oil or coconut oil. They are good. They're the monounsaturated oils. That's what you can safely have. I recommend having them cold. If you want to fry or cook with fat, have butter or lard or any of the other animal fats. The danger is the moment you heat up oils, they become toxic, they become oxidized, and they're not really good for you. So if you want to have your olive oil, which is fine, dribble it in small amounts over your salad, and that's fine. And as for margarines and all the seed oils, which is sunflower oil and cottonseed oil and all of that, they are highly, highly toxic. They are highly hydrogenized, and they're really not good, giving you anything good. They turn into aldehydes the moment they're getting heated up, and aldehydes are highly carcinogenic. I devoted an entire video about fats, showing how much negative effects oils and margarines have on our health. And there's a really, really good video from Nina Teicholz. She has she wrote an entire book about it, The Big Fat Surprise. I really recommend either getting that book, or I link the video from Nina Teicholz down there, down in the description box, where she actually says where she uncovers how much bad effects vegetable oils have, and how we got to the point that we have so many vegetable oils here. Very interesting video. I really recommend watching it. Let's move on. Can you have any sauces? So the high carb sauces are really like tomato sauce, barbecue sauce, and pesto, not pesto, tomato paste. So they have around 26 to 40 grams of carbs per 100 mil. So often, if you look at the barbecue bottle, it says, and you look at the 100 mil column, it's about 40 or 50% of just carbohydrates, sugars. So really read the labels. And for now, I would really stay away from all those sauces. Avoid if you possibly can. So moderately high are the pesto, the salsa, the mustards, which are okay. So they have between 6 and 8 grams per 100 gram. So they can be consumed as long as it's not in masses. The balsamic vinegar, I would be very, very careful with. They're fairly high. However, you only ever have a small amount of it. So even though balsamic vinegar in itself is very high in carbohydrates, but since you have only small amounts, usually you don't have balsamic sauce, or you don't have your potato, your veggies and drowning them in balsamic vinegar. So enjoy them with caution. And I think if you're not on a very strict ketogenic diet, they're probably okay. Read the labels, especially when it comes to mustard, especially Dijon mustard often has added sugar, and they're actually so much higher. So don't just buy mustard, read the label. And that particular brand here, the organic one, has even only 4 grams of carbs per 100 grams. So it's a very good mustard, tastes very nice, and it's very healthy for you. When it comes to the very, very low sauces, mayonnaise, hot chili, soy sauce, the vinaigrette, the béarnaise, the sauce hollandaise, the ranch dipping, the guacamole. So they are all excellent. So they are very, very low. They only fluctuate between 1 and 4 grams of carbs per 100 gram. So they're fairly safely to eat. And the only thing I usually say, be aware of vegetable oils. Try to buy products which doesn't have any sort of major amount of vegetable oils in there. So some people ask me, okay, what about artificial sweeteners? What about the Diet Coke I'm eating, the aspartame or drinking? So is it difficult to quit the sugar? Then some people opt for artificial sweeteners, but it's not really a good option, because what the research has shown. So if you continue to be on artificial sweeteners, research has shown that it's so much harder to lose the weight because they keep the cravings up. They increase your appetite and they really maintain that sort of hunger feeling at times. If you replace soft drinks with just water, that's absolutely excellent. So your weight loss will be so much more significant. improves your insulin sensitivity. Some of the artificial sweeteners actually do have an effect on insulin as well. So some of the animal studies even show that it can even alter your DNA and has really a negative effect on the gluconeogenesis in the liver. So it's really, I wouldn't do it. So there, I put all the references down below. So if you basically keep having artificial sweeteners, it may lower the sugar intake, but it has lots of other sort of negative effects. And also it alters actually a microbiome. So I would say no to artificial sweeteners. So what about natural sweeteners? So we have the usual ones are monk fruit, stevia, erythritol, and xylitol. So monk fruit comes from a tropical melon. Stevia is a South American shrub, which you can grow easily in your garden. So here in Australia, I just grow stevia quite happily. Erythritol comes mostly from cornstarch. And if you're worried about modified or genetically modified food, then probably erythritol is not really your go-to, or xylitol, which basically comes from the birch, from the birch tree. So monk fruit and stevia are the only natural ones, and erythritol and xylitol are the polyol ones. So they're polyols. If you have a sensitive gut, if you have IBS or anything which really upsets your stomach, then erythritol and xylitol are on the FODMAP list. So that's the polyols. I would probably stay away from them. Because they can cause some gastrointestinal sort of upsets. Both of them occur naturally in fruits, but they are, of course, highly processed, and that's why they're not really in their natural form anymore. As for the taste, monk fruit has a very slight aftertaste. Stevia has a bit of a bitter aftertaste. That's why some people don't really like stevia. I personally don't mind it too much. Erythritol has some kind of a sweet taste, which kind of feels a bit cold sweet, and xylitol is actually the sugar that or the natural sort of sugar which comes closest to sugar. So as for the sweetness, monk fruit is 150 times as sweet or sweeter than sugar. Stevia about 200 to 400 times sweeter than sugar. Erythritol is a touch less, is only 70% of sugar, and xylitol is probably 1-to-1. So if you use xylitol, you can use it as normal sugar. If you use erythritol for all your next baking goods, just have a little bit more. And if you have stevia or monk fruit, just be very careful, otherwise you completely oversweet everything. And as per the insulin response, so monk fruit, stevia, and erythritol, they all have a GI of 0. Xylitol is the only one that has a slight GI effect, but again, it's only in very small amounts, and it shouldn't have much of an effect at all. So I told you all about sugar substitutes. What about the flour substitutes? Remember, so flour should get out of your pantry and replace it with almond flour, hazelnut flour, flaxseed flour, linseed flour, psyllium husk flour. So they're all excellent sort of sources where you can do all your baking and all your cooking with those kind of flours. It's absolutely great. And if you're a bit on a low budget, I would just buy the seeds, like the flaxseed, for example. I would buy them in bulk and then blend them in the blender and make your own flaxseed meal. So that's what I've been doing. I've been doing it more for reasons because my flaxseed is so much flaxseed meal is so much fresher, and it hasn't lost its potency, or it hasn't lost all the sort of oils in there if I've freshly blended. So I tend to have not buying the flaxseed meal as already blended product. I tend to do it just before I use it for making bread. And it's excellent. It's absolutely delicious. So there's lots of really delicious bread and cake recipes. I'll link it all down below. But yeah, if you use the blender option, you can buy bulk, because if you have almond meal flour, or if you have flaxseed meal, you should keep it cool, because the fat in it, the oils in it, so they can go rancid fairly quickly. So that's the only reason why I just blend my own flour, and it's quickly done. You just push the button and boom, all ready. So here now comes to the alcohol. Some people are always asking about that. So just a few warnings: when you're on a low carb diet, your alcohol tolerance will significantly decrease. So what it means, you get drunk much faster. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's up to you. Again, moderation is the key. So even though some alcohols are okay in a ketogenic or on a low carb diet, but that doesn't mean that you can have a bottle of wine every day, because that would be liver unfriendly. What alcohol also can do is it can make you addicted. And if you're alcohol addicted already, keto may actually help you to come off the addiction a little bit easier, because alcohol and sugar have the same receptors and act on the same reward centers in the brain. So if you come off keto and you deal with that well, you may find it actually easier to deal with alcohol addiction. It also, alcohol increases your appetite, so you probably eat more than you actually want to. And again, if you have a fatty liver or you've got liver fibrosis already, I would hold off on the alcohol until you're metabolically cleaned up, and then you can add some alcohol. So, as per the alcohols, let's talk about what we shouldn't have. Beer. Beer is fermented grain. So beer is pretty much liquid bread. So on a low carb diet, beer is unfortunately a no-no. There are a couple of low carb beers, especially the American varieties. They have some low carb beers. And if just have that odd glass and you're not too much on a strict low carbohydrate diet, then by all means have your beer, as long as it's low carb, but don't make it an everyday celebration. So coolers, or the alcohol pops, or the hard lemonade, or the wine coolers, whatever you want to call them, they're full of sugar. They're premixed alcohols, full of sugar. No. Cocktails like the Cosmopolitan, the White Russian, the rum and coke, the vodka orange juice, or the gin tonic. So they're all very, very highly in sugars, and I would really literally stay away from them. So avoid all the sort of premixed drinks pretty much. So what are the better cocktails? Bloody Mary and Margarita is probably okay. So they have between 7 and 8 grams of carbs per glass. So if you're on a party, have those, enjoy the party, and just go back on the next on your low carb diet next day. I don't want you to be the social outsider. So if you really want to have a drink and if you really want to go out, have a couple of those, and that's fine. Yes, you will have a rich carb day then, but next day you will be fine. So that's why I call them in the yellow zone. So they should be consumed with caution when it comes to the carbohydrate content. So what's okay? Dry red wine and dry white wine or champagne. So they are the ones that have only 2 grams of carbs per glass. So you can have them. So even if you have 1 glass a night, that's okay. Again, alcohol stops you from being in ketosis. So because the alcohol needs to be burned first, and they often come with a fair bit of calories. So even though the carbs are low, but they can be loaded with calories. So if you really want to lose your weight, and if you really want to get results for metabolic health, I say, okay, have the odd one, have the odd glass, but don't have it every day. Don't consume too much. So don't get into the habit of consuming a whole bottle of wine. And what else? And then the hard drinks, of course, the whiskey, the martini, the brandy, the vodka, and the tequila. So they all have 0 carbs. So from the keto point of view, excellent. But from the liver health point of view, it's probably not that excellent. But you can have those without compromising your ketogenic diet. So you can find all of this at the Diet Doctor, at the low carb, at the dietdoctor.com pages, and I'll link everything below. You can look it up yourself and can reread it. And if you need a refresher, just go there. So what else? I would really like you to go into reading the food levels or food labels. Cut that first bit. What else? I would really like to get into the habit of reading food labels. I would like you, so when you buy something, I would like to turn that package around, go to the 100-gram section. So you have basically the percentage, and then go to the carbohydrates. If they say more than 10 grams per 100 gram, put it back. If they are under 10 grams of carbohydrates per 100 gram, that's probably fine. And you will probably want to have sugars, you want to have next to none in there. The fat the fat row is pretty much the most useless one. You want to try for higher fat, of course, and you want to have high saturated fats in there. But the real good information would be, okay, do we deal with any trans fats, or do we deal with any sort of extra, how much monounsaturated fats do we have, how much polyunsaturated fats do we have? So that would be a really useful information. But unfortunately, in Australia, it's not mandatory. So the food manufacturers normally don't do this. If you live in Australia, if you live in America, you are more lucky, because in America, you need to have the trans fats and the polyunsaturated and the monounsaturated fats labeled. But in Australia, unfortunately, we don't have, the food manufacturers don't have to do it. Also, not only read the labels, read the ingredients. Just saying, sugar has 65 names, and I listed only a couple of them here. So legally, the food industry is able to hide sugar in many different forms. So be really aware of it. They need to state it on the sugar column, on the sugar row, here on the food label. But be aware, they try to hide everything somewhere, because sugar is what makes you eating more, and that's what they want. Another word for the health star system. So the health star system is literally still based on the old paradigm that we need to have lots of carbohydrates and next to no fat. So the higher something is rated, the higher it is usually in carbohydrates and in fats. The more unhealthy it is. I'll cut back to health star system. So the health star system is another point I would like to talk about. The system is still based on that we should eat as little fat as possible, and just a little bit of sugar and a bit of carbohydrates. So the higher something is reading, often it contains lots of carbohydrates and it contains next to no fat. So if you basically look at the butter, it has very, very low reading, even though butter is technically so much more healthier for you. And if you have cereals which are full of sugar, they usually rate fairly high. So please do not look at the health star system. It is based on the old paradigm. It's not based on your health, and it may come with a surprise, but who's sitting on the chairs determining who's getting what health star? It's the food industry. So they're on the decision boards. The food industry is sitting. So representatives from Kellogg's and Sanitarium and you name it. So I also recommend being careful with foods that are labeled keto or low carb. So again, everything under 200 grams of carbs could be potentially called low carb, because at the moment we're consuming 300 or 400 grams of carbs a day. So whenever something is called low carb, don't be fooled and think it's okay. And if something is called keto, the carbs maybe drop down, but then they're often replaced with other things, like, for example, bread. So the first ingredient is wheat protein. So these breads are full of gluten, basically, which can really upset your stomach. So I would make my own bread. I actually do make my own bread. So that's what I'm recommending. The recipes are very easy and very healthy and really easy to make. And I would not trust the food manufacturers. If they say something, it doesn't always mean that that's the truth. So they know exactly how to package and name something for you to buy it. Okay, last but not least, meal planning. So I usually say, okay, pick your protein. So focus on the protein. So this should be your first ingredient. And then fill up with plenty of vegetables. So to get all the minerals, to get everything, you can really bulk it up. So then add fats for satiety and for taste. Don't be shy of fat, have it on. And last but not least, have some additional nuts and seeds for satiety and for some additional fats and for some really good minerals. So I can give you really beautiful pages, web pages where you can find delicious recipes. So all these web pages are approved by the diet doctors. I've tried out a few myself. Please don't just go to anything. I would recommend sticking to those web pages, because there's a lot of not so keto honest information out there. So they are very, very safe. I would highly recommend just looking onto those web pages to find delicious recipes. And just give it a go. Keep it simple, find some delicious recipes which work well for you, and have a go. So I hope it was helpful, and I hope you feel comfortable and ready to go with all the information I gave you. So in my clinic, so when I start patients on a low carb diet, I always say rule number 1 is it should be fun. Don't do anything that is not fun for you. Try out what you can eat, try some recipes, but if it is not for you, or if you haven't found the right substitutes, it should be fun, because then it's not sustainable. I have another video where I talk about substitutes and where I talk about how we can conquer certain food desires. That's a different video. So if you say like, oh, I need my snack, what we can do instead. So again, rule number 1 is it should be fun. If it's not fun, it's not sustainable. And I would like my patients to stay on that kind of lifestyle for the rest of their life, because that extends their lifespan significantly. It's not something short term, it's something it's a lifestyle change. And rule number 2, and that's a very important rule, eat when you're hungry and don't eat when you're not hungry. So don't count the calories, have an eye on the carbs. But if you're not eating when you're not hungry, you don't overdo it anyway. If you start listening to your body, if you start tuning into yourself, your body is telling you what you need. We just need to learn to trust our bodies again. And if you feel like you're not hungry for breakfast, don't have breakfast. Breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. It has never been the most important meal of the day. That's just brainwashing over the last 50 years. It is simply not true. If you struggle, I highly recommend finding a keto coach or having a chat with your keto doctor. If you want to, you can log in. So we offer all the services as well. But if you find someone near you, on the dietdoctor.com pages, there are lots of people registered, and you can pick someone maybe near you. So that's a really good start to go. Technically, it should be easy to do, but some people just struggle and staying on it. And that's when I recommend a coach, someone who keeps you on track and someone who helps you to ease into that kind of new lifestyle. So that's what I recommend. Okay, I have another video about potential side effects, because the low carb diet does come with some side effects initially. I have another video on low carb on a low budget. I recommend checking that out, and how to eat healthy and avoid all the food industry's nastinesses. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.